The most insane order of the Great Patriotic War did not begin with a shout. It began with a silence. It was the silence of a vast, frozen forest at night. A silence punctuated not by birds, but by the distant, methodical crunch of German tank treads. In a dugout, buried beneath snow and despair, a partisan commander named Victor did not pray. He calculated. His men, ghosts in rags, had explosives for tracks, Molotov cocktails for panzers, but against the steel beasts now hunting them, they were insects. His pencil, stubby and precious, moved in the flickering light. The message was not a plea. It was a clinical report on annihilation. It ended with 3 words, underlined twice. Require tank. Immediately. The paper traveled through hell, across front lines in the pockets of dead couriers, until it lay, smudged with mud and blood, on a desk of polished Karelian birch. In the Kremlin, the silence was different. It was the dense, airless quiet of a pressure chamber. Joseph Stalin read the note. He did not see a man named Victor. He saw a map. A forest that could be a fortress. A thorn that could become a spear. He looked at the exhausted general of the airborne forces. "They need a tank," Stalin stated, the words flat as a verdict. "So, give them one." The general, a man who had jumped from planes his entire life, almost laughed. It was a hysterical impulse he strangled in his throat. "Comrade Stalin, a T-34 weighs 28 tons. We cannot—" "Who spoke of a T-34? Stalin interrupted, lighting his pipe. The match scratch was deafening. "Use the little one, the T-60, and do not drop it. Fly it in." He exhaled smoke, which hung in the silence like a ghost. "Find Antonov, the glider man. Make him understand." Oleg Antonov understood gravity. He worshipped the elegance of lift. His mind was a sanctuary of rational calculation, a place where chaos was tamed by mathematics. When the NKVD car delivered him to the meeting, he expected to discuss the production flaws in the A-7 troop glider. He did not expect the general to slide a piece of paper across the table. It was Victor's note. Below it, in stark, typed letters, was the task. Aviation tank KT, link with T-60, flight range 300 km. Antonov's first reaction was not fear for his life, though that came instantly after. It was a profound professional offense. "This is absurd," he said, his voice colder than the air outside. "A tank is the antithesis of an aircraft. It is density. It is drag. It is everything we design against." The general's face was stone. The designer of the Antonovka apple tree did not ask for ideal soil. He made the fruit grow where it was needed. You are not being asked for an opinion. You are being ordered to grow wings on iron. That night, in his locked bureau, Antonov stared at the blueprints of the T-60. It was a modest, even pathetic machine. Thin armor, a 20mm gun, a mosquito against the German Tigers. But as he stared, a terrifying shift occurred in his mind. The engineer's revulsion began to warp, to mutate. The problem, monstrous and beautiful, unfolded its logic. Don't carry the tank. Make the tank the cargo, the fuselage, unnecessary weight, the landing gear, the tank's own treads, the pilot, the tank's driver. His hand, moving almost against his will, reached for a fresh sheet. He did not sketch a plane. He sketched a transformation. 2 long, graceful wooden wings, a twin boom tail, and nestled between them, not as a passenger, but as the beating metallic heart of the machine, the hull of a T-60. He had drawn a chimera. It was the most blasphemous thing he had ever created. It was also, he realized with a sinking thrill, potentially possible. The madness was now technical. It had dimensions, stress points, a center of gravity. This made it infinitely more dangerous. Pressure crystallized into a single, relentless figure. Colonel Grishin of the NKVD. He did not threaten. He attended every meeting, a shadow in a well-cut uniform. He would pick up a lightweight aluminum bolt from Antonov's desk, weigh it in his palm, and say softly, "Every gram counts, Comrade Antonov, for the tank and for you." The meaning was clear. Failure was not an option. It was a destination with only one possible outcome. Antonov became obsessed with weight. He stalked the factory where the T-60s rolled off the line, a spectral figure with calipers and a notepad. He ordered the vehicles stripped, the headlights gone, the toolkits gone. All but a symbolic splash of fuel. The crew would fly on vapor and hope. He calculated that the driver, hurtling earthward in a steel coffin, would need a second set of controls. Flight controls. A steering column became a joystick. Lever handles became aileron actuators. He was merging two manuals of survival into one incomprehensible guidebook. The project was baptized with a sterile acronym, KT, Krylya Tanka, tank wings. But in the whispered conversations of the workshop, where men breathed the smell of pine glue and fear, it had another name. They called it, with a mix of terror and perverse pride, Letayushchi tank, the flying tank. The name was a fairy tale. The thing taking shape in the guarded hangar was a stark, wooden reality. The final design was an absurdist masterpiece, a sleek 18-meter wingspan grafted onto the squat, angry form of a light tank. It looked like a hawk mating with a tortoise. The day the first full-scale wooden mock-up was wheeled out, a hush fell over the workers. Antonov stood before it, a small, tired man dwarfed by his own creation. He felt no pride. He felt the terrifying weight of the unproven. He had given madness a skeleton, muscles of timber and fabric. Now, it needed a soul. It needed a pilot who could believe the impossible long enough to make it fly, and a tank crew willing to fall from the sky, trusting him. Colonel Grishin materialized beside him, following his gaze. "It exists," the colonel said, a statement of fact. "Now you must prove it belongs in the air, and not as a monument to failure on the ground. The crew has been selected. The test will be in 2 months." He paused. "Find your pilot, Antonov. Find a man who is not afraid to crash." As Grishin walked away, Antonov remained, staring at the silent hybrid. The first step was complete. They had built a door to a new kind of warfare. Behind it lay either glory or a fireball in some anonymous field. And Oleg Antonov, the rationalist, the engineer, now had to find a man willing to turn the key. A man who fears the ground makes the best pilot for the sky. The man they sent to Antonov feared nothing. This, in itself, was a problem. Sergei Anokhin did not walk into the guarded hangar. He materialized, short, compact, with a calm that radiated like a physical chill. He was the Soviet Union's premier test pilot for the unthinkable, a man who treated aircraft as extensions of his own nervous system. He had landed planes with no tail, survived spins from which the manuals promised only death. He greeted Antonov with a nod, not a salute. His eyes were already past the designer, absorbing the KT. It sat in a shaft of dusty light, a creature of two worlds, belonging to neither. The raw pine of its wings smelled of the forest. The green steel of the T-60 hull smelled of the factory and oil. Anokhin circled it in silence. Antonov found himself talking, explaining the aileron linkages, the cable runs to the tank's controls, the calculated stall speed. Anokhin said nothing. He placed a hand on the tank's cold frontal plate, then on the wood of the wing root, feeling the dissonance. "You built a glider," Anokhin stated finally, his voice quiet and flat. "But its heart is a brick. You want me to teach this brick to dance." "We want you to prove it can fly," Antonov corrected, a flare of defensive pride in his gut. Anokhin turned to him. The calm in his eyes was not peace. It was the absolute focus of a predator, or a condemned man. "Do not lie to me, Chief Designer. You do not need a pilot. You need a shaman. You want me to perform a miracle with your equations as my scripture. I have read your calculations. They are elegant. They are also a fantasy. The center of gravity is a suggestion. The stress models are prayers." He tapped the hull. "This is a fact, and it wants to fall." For the first time, Antonov saw the project through unclouded eyes. Not as an engineering challenge, but as a physical act of violence against physics. And he saw the man who would absorb that violence. He chose honesty. The calculations are the best possible version of the truth. The reality will be worse. Will you fly it? Anokhin did not answer immediately. He climbed onto the wing, his movements economical, precise. He peered into the tank's hatch, then into the glider's minimalist cockpit. A second set of controls installed just behind the wing. 2 brains for 1 beast. Who was the tank driver? They had chosen a young lieutenant, Vasily Kravtsov, a veteran of 3 months, with eyes too old for his face. He was a mechanic, a man who understood machines from the inside out. When he was brought in, he stood rigid before the KT, his face pale. He was not afraid of death. He was afraid of the absurdity of dying in a joke. "You will sit in the tank," Antonov explained to him. "Your hatch will be open. You will have a simplified dashboard. Airspeed, altimeter. Your primary job is to listen, to the wind, to the strain in the frame, and when we land, you must be ready to fight, to become a tank again, in seconds." Kravtsov looked from the scholarly Antonov to the icy Anokhin, then back to the monstrous hybrid. "I am a tanker," he said, his voice cracking only once. "I fight on the ground. This is not the ground." Anokhin, still perched on the wing, looked down at him. "From today, Lieutenant, there is no ground. Only air that hasn't left us yet. Get in." The tests began not in the sky, but in the realm of controlled humiliation. They called them jumps. A powerful truck would tow the KT down the long, pitted runway at Zhukovsky Airfield. The goal was not to fly, but to feel. To feel how the tank's mass fought the lift of the wings. To feel the sickening lag in the controls. On the first run, the tow cable snapped with a crack, like a rifle shot. The KT, barely at 50 kilometers per hour, slewed violently to the side, a dead weight on rolling tank treads. The wooden wingtip gouged a scar in the earth. Inside the tank, Vasily was thrown against his hatch rim, tasting blood. In the glider's cockpit, Anokhin's hands had moved a microsecond before the crack, sensing the instability. He sat perfectly still afterwards, analyzing the failure. "The cable was inferior," he reported, unbuckling. "The attachment point is sound. We need a steel heart for a steel beast. The truck is insufficient. We need the real pull." The real pull was the Tupolev TB-3, a 4-engine bomber from another age, a giant of corrugated metal. When they rolled it out to tow the KT, the sight was apocalyptic. It was an elephant being asked to tow a charging rhino on a piece of string. The first airborne test was a disaster that was recorded as a success. The TB-3, engines screaming at maximum war emergency power, lumbered down the runway, the KT rattling behind it. For a few breathtaking seconds, the wheels of the tank left the earth. It flew, 2 meters, for 5 seconds. Then it slammed back down, the impact shuddering through the frame. The bomber struggled to climb, barely clearing the pine trees at the end of the field. In the debriefing room, the atmosphere was funereal. The lead bomber pilot, a grizzled colonel, slammed his helmet on the table. "It is an anchor, a flying damnable anchor. My engines are on fire the whole time. We cannot get to altitude. We are a perfect target, dragging this barn behind us." Colonel Grishin watched from the corner, saying nothing. His silence was the loudest condemnation. Anokhin spoke into the fury. "The colonel is correct. The TB3 is too weak. We need a PE-8, with the stronger engines." A hollow laugh echoed. "The PE-8? We have a handful. They are for bombing Berlin, not for your circus tricks." Antonov felt the project crumbling. The numbers were right, but the world was wrong. The world lacked the perfect engine, the perfect cable, the perfect air. Anokhin waited for the room to quiet. He turned to the bomber colonel. "You did not get to altitude. What was the maximum?" 300 meters. Maybe. A child could throw a stone and hit us. Anokhin looked at Antonov, then at Grishin. 300 meters is enough." "Enough for what?" Grishin's voice cut the air. "Enough to prove the concept," Anokhin said. "Enough to show the glider is stable, to show the controls work. We do not need to cross the front lines today. We need to prove the brick can leave the ground and return in one piece. One flight, one clean release, a circuit, a landing. Give me the TB3. Give me one chance." He was not asking. He was stating a trajectory. Antonov saw it then. The true core of the project was not the glue and steel, not his calculations. It was the immutable, terrifying will of this one man. Sergei Anokhin had decided the KT would fly. The universe, with its gravity and drag and the NKVD's ticking clock, was now merely a set of conditions to be managed. The authorization came down, brittle and conditional. One flight, weather permitting. Tomorrow. That night, Antonov found Anokhin in the hangar, sitting alone in the glider's cockpit. His eyes closed, hands resting on the controls. He was not sleeping. He was programming his muscles, his senses, merging with the machine, learning its language of groans and tremors, before a single word was spoken in the air. "Why are you doing this?" Antonov asked, the question escaping him in the dark. "You know the risks better than anyone. The margins are theoretical." Anokhin opened his eyes. In the gloom, they gleamed with a cold, reflected light. "Because you were right, Antonov. And you were wrong. The calculations are a fantasy. But the idea is pure. A tank from the sky. It is not insane. It is the next logical step. And someone must take it." He looked back at the instrument panel, a ghost in a machine of his own making. "If it must be me, then it will be me. Now let me listen to my aircraft." Dawn at Zhukovsky Airfield was not a sunrise. It was an unveiling. A slow gray light pulled back the shadows to reveal the two machines on the runway, locked in a fatal embrace. The Tupolev TB3 bomber, its 4 engines already coughing oily smoke, a relic from a more optimistic time. And behind it, the KT, the flying tank, looking in the pale light less like a weapon and more like a grotesque, shackled bird. The tow cable between them was not a lifeline. It was a tether to a shared fate. Sergei Anokhin performed his final checks with a monastic silence. He wore his standard flight jacket, no special insignia. Ritual was his armor. He ran his hands over the plywood skin of the glider's fuselage, feeling for any imperfection, any telltale vibration from the night's cold. His mind was not on the coming storm of air, but on the precise pressure point of a bolt, the tension of a control wire. Inside the tank, Lieutenant Vasily Kravtsov was strapped into the driver's seat. They had sealed his hatch almost completely, leaving only a narrow slit for the altimeter and a view of the sky he was about to fall into. The tank smelled of cold metal, gasoline, and raw fear. His hands, which could field strip a transmission in darkness, trembled on the dual controls. Anokhin's voice crackled over the crude intercom, sharp and clear. "Vasily, you are a passenger until I say otherwise. Your only task is to breathe. In, out. Do not fight me." The simplicity of the order was a small anchor. Oleg Antonov stood at the edge of the field, with Colonel Grishin and a handful of terrified engineers. He held no clipboard. His calculations were done. All that remained was the experiment. Grishin lit a cigarette, the smoke snatched away by the wind. History or a funeral pyre, Antonov, he mused. Either way, we will have our answer. Antonov did not respond. He was watching Anokhin, who gave one final curt nod from the glider's cockpit. The bomber's engines rose to a deafening, shrieking crescendo. The massive propellers bit the air, straining against the impossible load. The tow cable snapped taut, vibrating with a lethal hum. For a long, agonizing moment, nothing moved. The KT resisted, a prisoner refusing its execution. Then, inch by terrible inch, it began to roll. The tank's treads clattered on the concrete, a sound of terrestrial protest. The speed built with agonizing slowness. 70 kilometers per hour. 90. The wings of the glider, so fragile-looking, began to earn their keep. A shudder ran through the entire assembly. The TB3, the cable, the KT. Antonov's breath caught. It was the resonance of disaster, the harmonic frequency of structural failure. But it held. At 110 kilometers per hour, the clattering stopped. The tank's treads left the ground. It was not a graceful ascent. It was a reluctant separation, a theft of mass from the earth. The KT wallowed for a second, yawing to the left, then right, as Anokhin's hands, visible through the cockpit glass, made tiny, brutal corrections. He was not flying. He was wrestling a phantom. The tow cable was not a guide, but a madman's leash, whipping and jerking, transmitting every stumble of the bomber ahead. They climbed. 100 meters. 200. The world below became a map, quiet and small. The noise inside the glider was a hellish symphony. The shriek of wind through every ill-fitted joint, the groan of wooden spars, the metallic creak of the tank hull shifting in its cradle. Vasily, in his steel cocoon, closed his eyes and focused on the breathing. In. Out. Then the crisis. The bomber pilot's voice, strained and metallic, erupted over Anokhin's radio. "We cannot hold it. Engines 3 and 4 are overheating. We are losing power." Anokhin's eyes flicked to his instruments. The airspeed was bleeding away. The altimeter needle quivered at just over 300 meters. A pathetic height. A death sentence. The TB3 was not climbing anymore. It was staggering, dragging them towards a stall. The protocol was clear. Abort. Release the cable. Attempt an emergency landing straight ahead in whatever field or forest awaited. But a straight-ahead landing meant plowing into the trees at the airfield's edge with no altitude for a turn. It was a controlled crash. Colonel Grishin on the ground saw the bomber's laboring struggle, saw the KT beginning to sag like a pendulum. "He will release now," Grishin stated. already turning to order the crash trucks. Antonov said nothing. He was watching the glider's ailerons. They were not neutral. They were actively moving. In the cockpit, time dilated. Anokhin processed 1,000 data points. The sinking feeling in his gut, the scream of the wind, the angle of the straining cable, the pale strip of a distant fallow field to the east across a river. The calculations were instantaneous, visceral. The TB-3 could not give him altitude. Therefore, altitude was irrelevant. Energy was everything. He needed speed, and he needed to convert the bomber's failing pull into one last, desperate gift. He keyed the intercom, his voice unnervingly calm. "Vasily, brace. We are leaving the bus early." Without waiting, he did 3 things in rapid succession. He pulled the release lever for the tow cable. The clang was visceral, a sound of severed destiny. The sudden release caused the KT to buck violently, nose pitching up into a near stall. He instantly pushed the stick forward, trading the last precious meters of altitude for airspeed, pointing the nose at the distant field. And he began a shallow banking turn, not back towards the airfield, but towards the only viable patch of earth his pilot's eye had registered. The silence was the most terrifying thing. The roar of the bomber faded ahead. Now there was only the howl of the wind and the creaking of the wooden airframe. They were a brick, falling with style. Anokhin's hands danced. He fought the stall, coaxed the glide, his mind a computer of angles and descent rates. The field rushed up, a blur of brown and green, terrifyingly small. He saw a ditch, a line of posts. No time to avoid them. "Vasily, now! Tread brakes. Full lock on my mark." He flared the glider, pulling its nose up in the final seconds, bleeding off the last speed. The tank's hull slammed into the earth with a catastrophic crunch. The wooden wings, their job done, shrieked in protest, then collapsed, shearing away in a cloud of splinters and fabric. The tank, now just a tank again, skidded forward on its treads, gouging a deep, wet scar through the soil, churning mud and shattered crops. It slammed into the ditch, jolting to a stop at a drunken angle. The silence returned, thick and stunned, broken only by the hiss of steam from the tank's vents. In the control tower, they had lost visual. The radio was silent. Antonov felt the world shrink to a single, cold point of failure. Colonel Grishin's face was a mask of final judgment. Then, a static crackle, and a voice, strained, but unmistakably Anokhin's. "KT on ground. Crew intact. Glider is expendable. The tank is operational. I repeat, the tank is operational." They found them like that. Anokhin, already extracted from the splintered cockpit wreckage, standing on the bent wing root, smoking a cigarette, calmly surveying the chaos of wood and wire around him. And Vasily Kravtsov, who had thrown open his hatch, was vomiting into the mud, his body shaking with the aftershock of a transition no human was meant to make. But when he looked up, his eyes, red-rimmed and wild, met Antonov's. He didn't speak. He simply raised a hand and gave a weak, shaky thumbs up. The tank, scarred and caked in earth, sat in the field. Its gun was still straight. Its treads, though buried, were whole. It could be driven away. Anokhin walked over to Antonov, who stood trembling, the adrenaline draining to leave a hollow void. He dropped his cigarette, crushed it under his boot in the Russian mud. "Your calculations were off," he said quietly. Antonov stared at him, the words a final blow. "You overestimated the drag," Anokhin continued, a ghost of something like respect in his eyes. It flies worse than you predicted. But it flies. The idea works. He looked past Antonov at the approaching figures of Grishin and the recovery team. The test was over. The data was in. The flying tank had flown, had fallen, and had risen from the mud as a tank again. They had proven it was possible. Now, the real judgment would begin, not from the laws of physics, but from the brutal, pragmatic logic of war. Victory has a taste. In the muddy field, it tasted like diesel smoke, splintered pine, and bile. Sergei Anokhin stood as its monument, calm, unbroken, a smudge of oil on his cheek. The medical team fussed over Vasily, who was now sitting on the tank's frontal plate, sipping water with hands that would not stop their fine, constant tremor. His eyes were fixed on the horizon, seeing not fields, but the terrifying, featureless blue he had just fallen through. Oleg Antonov approached the wreck. The glider's wings were shattered sculptures. The elegant twin-boom tail was a crumpled kite. But nestled in the center of this wooden carnage, like a seed in rotten fruit, sat the T-60. Its green paint was scraped, its fenders bent. Anokhin had spoken truth. It was operational. A mechanic from the recovery team was already checking the engine. With a sharp pull of the crank, it coughed to life. The familiar, sputtering roar absurdly normal against the silence. The tank reversed out of the ditch under its own power, treads churning the sacred data of their flight into meaningless mud. This image, the tank leaving the womb of its own wreckage, became the foundational myth of the project. It was all anyone would remember. The controlled crash was forgotten. The shattered glider was a footnote. Back at the bureau, a subdued euphoria took hold. Young engineers clapped Antonov on the back. "You did it, Chief! It flies!" They spoke of optimizations, of a stronger tow plane, of production lines for the wooden wings. Antonov allowed himself, for one evening, to dream. He saw them in his mind. A flock of silent gliders, released high behind enemy lines, disgorging their angry steel beetles into the forests of France, the hills of Italy. A dagger aimed at the heart of any front. The state report was authored by Colonel Grishin. It was a masterpiece of cold blood. It did not lie. It presented the facts with surgical precision, and in doing so, performed an execution. Section 1. The machine. The KT glider performed within 78% of projected glide parameters. The airframe, designed for single use, failed on landing as anticipated. The T-60 light tank, post-flight and post-landing, remained combat-ready after minor field repairs. Pilot capability was exceptional. Technical concept is validated. A paragraph of triumph. Section 2. The logistics of a mirage. This was the kill shot. Grishin's prose became a relentless inventory of impossibility. 1. The tow aircraft. The TB-3 is inadequate. The only viable engine is the PE-8 with AM-35A engines. Current production 4 per month. Priority: long-range strategic bombing of German industrial centers. Allocation: 0. 2. The tank. The T-60 is obsolete. Its 20mm gun cannot penetrate the frontal armor of any German tank past 1941. Its own armor is vulnerable to heavy machine gun fire. By the time a KT system could be fielded, estimated 12 to 18 months, the enemy will have deployed next-generation vehicles, rendering the T-60 a suicide capsule. 3. The crew. The pilot requires the reflexes of a frontline fighter ace and the nerves of a test pilot. The tank crew must be trained aeronautical engineers and infantrymen. Each KT unit requires 3 irreplaceable men. Loss rate on landing in contested territory is projected at 40%. even without enemy action. 4. The scale. To deliver a company of 10 tanks, a negligible tactical force, would require 10 PE-8 aircraft, a significant portion of the entire heavy bomber fleet, grounded for specialized modification, plus 10 elite pilot tanker teams. For the same resources, the Air Force can deliver 250 tons of conventional supplies to partisans via conventional means, or the Tank Bureau can produce 50 modern T-34 medium tanks. The final sentence of the section was a quote from an unnamed front commander, solicited by Grishin. "Give me 50 more T-34s for the next offensive, not one fairy tale that might give me 10 tin cans behind the enemy next year." Section 3. The Verdict. While the A-40 KT project represents a significant and inventive engineering achievement, its tactical value is disproportionate to the strategic resource investment required. The material, industrial, and human costs of serial production and deployment cannot be justified at the current stage of the war. Recommend immediate termination of development and reallocation of resources to priority programs. The report landed on Antonov's desk with the finality of a guillotine blade. He read it in his silent office. He did not rage. He recognized the truth in it. He had been so focused on the can that he had deliberately avoided the should. He had out-engineered the problem of flight, but he could not out-engineer the brutal arithmetic of total war. His creation was a Formula One car in a trench war, brilliant, fragile, and utterly irrelevant. He sought out Anokhin, finding him in a hangar, already back at work on a new fighter plane's stability tests. The pilot listened as Antonov summarized the report, his face unreadable. "They are not wrong," Anokhin said finally, wiping his hands on a rag. "It was a beautiful weapon, for a different war, a cleaner one." He looked at Antonov, and for the first time, the designer saw a flicker of something like pity. "We proved it could be done. That is our victory. It will be in the books." In 1942, they flew a tank. The why will be forgotten. The official closure was administrative. No ceremony. The remaining glider parts were broken down for scrap lumber. The modified T-60 was returned to a conventional unit. The Design Bureau was reassigned to work on cargo gliders and assault landing gear, practical, unglamorous tools of war. The final meeting was with Colonel Grishin. He returned Antonov's original sketch, the one of the tank with wings. "A fascinating artifact," Grishin said. "History will remember the boldness. The state, however, must remember the balance sheet." He paused at the door. "Your next project, the A-7 glider production, it is proceeding well. It is useful. Make more of what is useful, Comrade Antonov. The time for miracles is over." Antonov was left alone with his drawing. He looked at the graceful lines, the bold vision. It was not a failure of engineering. It was a failure of timing. They had built a key for a lock that did not yet exist, in a house that was on fire. The fire demanded axes, not delicate keys. He filed the drawing away, not in the project folder, but in a drawer of personal papers. It was not a blueprint anymore. It was a monument to a brief, blinding moment when they had looked at the laws of nature and the demands of war and had dared to whisper a third option. The whisper had been heard, tested, and found to be, in the cruel calculus of 1942, too quiet. The flying tank was dead. It had been killed not by the sky, but by the earthbound, unanswerable logic of necessity. The war did not end with a miracle. It ended with weight. The crushing, thunderous weight of 10,000 T-34s. The relentless weight of artillery barrages that lasted for days. The final, world-bending weight of a red flag raised over rubble in Berlin. Oleg Antonov's gliders, the practical A-7s, had flown in silence, carrying surgeons and ammunition to partisans. They were useful. They were forgotten. Sergei Anokhin continued to dance with death, testing jets that broke the sound barrier, his calm unchanged. He never spoke of the KT unless asked, and then his answer was a technical footnote. The controls were heavy. The landing was predictable. No poetry, just data. The flying tank receded into the realm of anecdote, a curious what-if for historians of obscure weaponry. A grainy photograph survived, the T-60 nestled in its wooden wings, looking awkward and brave. The caption in archives read, "Experimental Glider Tank A-40, 1942. Tests inconclusive. Project terminated." The truth, the scream of overstressed engines, the smell of pine and fear, Vasily's trembling thumbs up in the mud, was erased by the bland bureaucracy of the filing cabinet. Decades passed. The Iron Curtain hardened, then rusted. Antonov, now a legendary aircraft designer with his name on the world's largest cargo planes, found the old sketch while moving offices. The paper was yellowed, the lines faint. He did not feel nostalgia. He felt the ghost of that old, defiant calculation. He slid it into a new folder. The world changed. The nature of war changed. It became faster, more vertical, demanding precision over mass. The connection is not made in a designer's office. It is made in a briefing room at a NATO airbase, and later in a mirrored war room in Moscow. The problem is the same, echoed across a new divide. How do you deliver decisive force, instantly, anywhere? The American answer is not a glider. It is the Lockheed C-130 Hercules, a roaring turboprop workhorse. And beneath its wings, they engineer a monstrous kit, the M551 Sheridan, a light, aluminum-hulled tank, officially an armored reconnaissance airborne assault vehicle. It is airdroppable. With a giant parachute system, it falls from the sky, a shuddering, violent descent. It lands with a crash that jars the crew's spines, often breaking components. But it works. It is a tank from the sky. The concept is baptized airborne armor. In the Soviet Union, the generals watch. They remember. The files are dusted off. The old, bold idea is reborn, not in wood and fabric, but in titanium and composite alloys. They call it the BMD, the Boyevaya Mashina Desanta, the combat vehicle of the airborne. It is not a modified tank. It is a vehicle conceived in the womb of an aircraft. It is compact, amphibious, heavily armed for its size, and it is not dropped with parachutes alone. A new system is developed, the jet-braking rocket system. The BMD, under a constellation of parachutes, fires rockets just before impact to cushion its landing. It is a controlled crash with technology Anokhin could only dream of. The crews are no longer terrified tankers. They are elite desantniki, trained for the violent transition from sky to earth. They call the landing the second birth. Then, the next leap. The colossal Antonov An-124 Ruslan cargo plane, a direct descendant of Oleg Antonov's lifework, opens its jaw. What drives out is not a crate. It is a main battle tank, a T-80. It rolls down the ramp, battle-ready, delivered across continents in hours. This is the final, stunning evolution, strategic airlift. The idea of the flying tank has shed its wings entirely. The aircraft itself has become the wing. The final scene is not in a war room. It is in a modern aerospace museum. A young boy stands before a display. On one side, there is the grainy, blown-up photograph of the A-40, the T-60, with its ridiculous, beautiful wings. The label calls it a daring but impractical experiment. Next to it, suspended from the vaulted ceiling, is the sleek, predatory form of a BMD-4 vehicle, its angular contours made for stealth and speed, its parachute pack neatly stowed. Further down the hall looms a massive transport plane's front section. The boy's father, a veteran pilot, points from the old photo to the modern vehicle. See this? They thought it was crazy, and it was. But they tried. They proved the core idea, that armor should not be chained to the ground. Did it work? The boy asks, pointing to the A-40. It flew, the father says, choosing his words with the care of a man who understands both mechanics and history. It flew once, and that was enough. That one flight was a question shouted into the future. Every vehicle that falls from the sky today, that is the answer. The camera, in this final moment, does not linger on the boy. It pulls back, framing the two exhibits together in a single shot. The crude, hopeful wooden wings of 1942 and the sharp, lethal reality of the 21st century. The line connecting them is invisible, but it is as strong as steel cable. It is the line of an idea that refused to die. Oleg Antonov's sketch was not a blueprint for a weapon. It was a blueprint for a paradigm. They did not build his tank. They built his future. The flying tank never entered the war it was designed for. Instead, it quietly, inexorably, changed the face of all the wars that came after. The madness had not been refuted. It had simply been waiting for the world to catch up.